What's up, guys? Welcome back to the show. I hope 2020 is off to a great start for you so far. It's certainly off to an interesting start for Bitcoin. My guest today is John Carvalho, also known as Bitcoin Error Log on Twitter. He's one of the driving forces at BitRefill, which is a company that allows you to, quote, live on crypto. And they do that by supplying a vast array of gift cards for pretty much all your daily needs that you can purchase with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. John's an OG Bitcoiner. He's been in the space for a long time. He's also an educator. His writing is very well received and very highly regarded in the space. I've really enjoyed a piece he put out fairly recently talking about who secures Bitcoin, and thought that was really fascinating. Just kind of reminded me that I think a lot of us, or I'll speak for myself, I try to keep up with what's going on in Bitcoin, and it's so hard because there's so much going on and there's so much innovation happening, and you're kind of, I find myself trying to keep up with like the bleeding edge, but I still think it's tremendously valuable to reflect and reconsider the basics from time to time, if not often, because there's always a different perspective and there's always a greater appreciation that you can have for the basics. And this is why myself, and I'm sure many of you, are so just enamored with this thing, because every time you look at it, you see something different in it, or you gain a better appreciation for the implications or what it represents. And so John, in his writing, has helped me do that. And so I'm grateful for that. Final note, John actually mentioned in the show that one of his favorite Bitcoiners was Eric Voskuil. He's a big fan of his thinking and his writing. And Eric actually reached out to me recently. He's hosting the Crypto Econ Conference in Hanoi, Vietnam, from February 28th to March 3rd. And he just asked me if I could shout it out on the pod. No problem from my side. Eric and I had an awesome conversation, 3+ hours long. If you're into Eric's stuff, you might enjoy that episode, so check it out. And if you want some more information about the conference, you can visit cryptoecon.org, cryptoecon.org, to get all the info. That's it. Enjoy the show.
Let's do it.
All right, man. Well, let's jump into it. So thanks for giving me the time today. I've been enjoying your output for a while. You know, I first came across you during the infamous Roger Ver interview, and since that time have been following your stuff. And then recently you wrote an article. You put out some stuff on Twitter asking, a poll or multiple choice thing about who secures Bitcoin, and then you put out an article following that. And then Guy Swan at the Crypto Economy did a reading of it, and then he provided his thoughts afterwards. And I really enjoyed that. So I just wanted to get you on to maybe dig deeper into that and then see where we go from there.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I also really enjoy what Guy is doing with reading, interesting articles and stuff. And it was kind of cool to hear like your own writing, like read as if it's like a book on tape or something.
Yeah, he's got the voice for it for sure. And obviously he's very well informed and spends a lot of time digging into this stuff. So it's Guy's one of the most value add, podcasts or content producers in the space, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely underrated. The way he not only will like force you to read something by listening to it, but also like he goes into explaining everything as well.
Yeah, and life happens, right? So you don't realize how much great stuff is being written by so many of the people in the space, So you look at Guy's library and you're just like, holy fuck, there's hundreds of them.
Yeah, I mean, in this like super connected society we're making, having people curating information is definitely valuable.
Yeah, 100%. So John, is your location a secret, or are you public about where you are?
No, it's not really a secret. I live in Romania.
Right. And so do you mind if I ask, why Romania?
Sure. Basically, around, I think it was the end of 2016, I was getting involved with a private project, basically with some guys I knew, and they happened to be from Romania. And this was a Bitcoin project, basically to work on allowing video streaming and Bitcoin tipping. And that was kind of like a private pet project I did for a couple of years with them. And about a year ago I was at the point where I had decided to either double down and raise money and do it very seriously, or to kind of move on and do something new. So I moved on.
Right. And what's it like over there, living in Romania?
I don't know how familiar you are with, Europe or Eastern Europe, but it's pretty quiet. It's peaceful. It's similar climate to maybe say the Northeast in the U.S. here.
Hmm.
It can get pretty warm in the summer and pretty cold in the winter. But it's in a nice area. A lot of places in Europe to visit that aren't far from here. It's pretty good.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I drove through Europe, or not through all of Europe, but through much of it in 2018 in the summer in a motorhome. So I didn't get quite as far uh, east as Romania, but I went through Czech Republic and a little bit of Slovakia and Hungary, and then down through Slovenia into Italy. It's beautiful. I mean, beautiful place, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. I still have a lot more I should probably visit, but there's no rush.
So, what's keeping you busy these days? You mentioned, the reason why you went over there. You're doing Bit Refill now, but maybe just give me like the abbreviated version of how you came into Bitcoin and how to be here. I know you've talked about it a million times, so we don't need to get to spend too much time on it.
Well, this is supposed to be a rapid fire podcast. Let's see how fast I can go. I came in late 2012 into the Bitcoin world because of Silk Road news. Started looking into it, became addicted, obsessed with Bitcoin and all the concepts and disciplines related to discussing and debating it. Played with everything to do with Bitcoin, mining, trading, etc., and eventually became more interested, in the public conversation and political aspects. Not really a big fan of politics in general. I totally ignore them, but in the Bitcoin world, it's definitely very interesting to me. Then started trying to do actual projects where I could either help Bitcoin or at least have a job in crypto, and that's when the video project kind of came about. And now I am actually having my career merging with crypto. My previous life, I was doing, marketing and branding related work, and now I'm doing communications and kind of business development work at BitRefill. And that started about a year ago. In that year and the year before, BitRefill has been growing pretty aggressively. Things are going pretty well. We're playing around with Lightning stuff. In general, BitRefill is a company that's trying to help people be able to live on crypto, primarily through offering gift card and phone refill products with crypto as a payment method, but also kind of building infrastructure for the kind of commerce side of Bitcoin using Lightning Network.
Wow, well done.
I'm sure I skipped plenty and said too much about some things, but that's
No,
where.
man, that was awesome. I want to. So the first thing I've heard you talk, the first project that you did in Bitcoin was the streaming service. This was Exotica.tv or something like that. Was
Yes,
that the name of it?
yes.
Yeah. And so this was like adult entertainment, and you were trying to integrate Bitcoin tips or payment for that.
Pretty much. I mean, I'm always interested. Like even back then, you could still argue this is within the realm of like circular economy for Bitcoin. I've
For
always
sure.
been interested in letting people kind of leverage the power of Bitcoin to opt out of normal society, and this seemed like a really good fit. Um, what I learned in working in that on that project is that, and in like Romania is like one of like the vital organs of the adult entertainment industry as far as live streaming goes.
Okay.
I don't know about the porn side, but as far as the online live streaming, it's a big part of the industry. And what I learned from the people in that industry that have been in there for years helped me kind of realize that even though it's a great fit on paper, the scale to do this properly, to actually try to move the industry over to this technology or using it instead and realizing the benefits, the scale would have to be much larger. And the risk still is just gets higher because the industry just really isn't quite ready yet. And the problems that are being solved, it's more like for a portion of the industry. There's definitely a portion of the industry that's kind of being, oppressed by the banking system and other, business aspects with banking and fraud with credit cards. Like everything is like more expensive to process in this world. So there is some problems that can be solved there. But, between things like Bitcoin volatility, education, skepticism, there's a lot to conquer, and you can't really do this with like a garage startup budget.
Sure. And did you have to like individually one-on-one pitch like the streamers? Would you contact them and be like, we're
Not
from this.
not so much. Part of the reason why Romania was a good choice for this project and why um, it's not quite that way is there's a studio kind of environment, and so what you have is you have like chat studios, video chat studios, and they're uh, having anywhere between a dozen to 200 different models that they have enlisted in their studio that are working in different shifts, etc. And so it's more about convincing the studios that this is something, and educating the studios that this could be something good for them. And honestly, I did talk to many big studio owners here, and the volatility and the education and stuff, it was an issue, but it was not nearly an issue as much as I thought. Mostly the issue is just if you want to compete, you have to compete on generating traffic and generating traffic of people that want to pay in crypto. Well, everything is a subset of Bitcoin, right? So the subset of Bitcoiners or crypto people, if you want to go broader, um, that want to pay for online adult streaming is small. So the market, your job really becomes trying to convert the industry to a new technology, and it's a much bigger undertaking.
Right. And why do you think the market is small for Bitcoiners wanting to spend on, such a product?
Because the market of Bitcoin is
It is
small.
small. Right.
Yeah. I think we forget this. Even, I've been here 7 years, and the people that have been here since before, say, 2017, like it feels like forever, and it feels like a big part of your world and a big part of your life. But really, like the amount of users in this space and the amount of businesses, and it's still really small. Even the market cap is still really small if you start comparing to things.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, I mean, I don't consciously remind myself of it often. It's just something that, bubbles up in your consciousness every so often because, as you said, some of us are super deep in this space for various reasons. Maybe we're building a career in it. Maybe we're just super optimistic and enthusiastic about what it represents and all that kind of stuff. And the bulk of our conversations, or at least intellectual conversations, are around it and yada yada yada. So you end up thinking like this is a massive like black hole that's consuming the world, and you hear about it from Congress people or the president, and you're like, oh my god, it's happening. But really, you go out into normal life, and yeah, people. I think a lot of people have heard of it now, and we can probably attribute that to 2017. But not very many people understand it, know it, value it, are that intrigued by it. So, we're still quite niche, I guess.
For sure. I mean, I've been around long enough to see several of these like cycles that we have, and there are recurring things that happen every cycle, and one of them is it seems like everybody has heard of Bitcoin when it's mooning, and it seems like everybody thinks Bitcoin is dead when it's not. And so you kind of have to work around that, but it's okay.
Do you
Um,
do you
it's
think
not
it's get?
just. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say it's not just small in that context too. It's also small in that the amount of Bitcoin we can actually see and interact with is even smaller than the amount of actual people using crypto. Like echo chamber kind of considerations with crypto Twitter and things like this. Like this is such a small subset of the people in the world in Bitcoin and then now in social media. And sometimes I think a lot of people think it's like the whole crypto world.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. And that being in Bitcoin Twitter, because the way my story goes, and I'll be brief, but I was interested in the space. Whenever Bitcoin reached parity with the U.S. dollar, because I remember a big kerfuffle about that. But didn't get really involved until 2014, and have been following it ever since. But was never really into. I didn't know Bitcoin Twitter was a thing, right? So I just kind of did my own thing and talked about it and maybe recorded some interviews when the opportunities arose. But when I finally did kind of wind up in Bitcoin Twitter this year, first of all, it's like, holy shit, this is awesome. Like these are my people. I get to geek out with all these people. But it made me realize like how, because a lot of like my other friends, for example, they have no idea that Bitcoin Twitter exists. But to those of us who are in it, it's like the end all be all. It's where information is, all the interesting thoughts and information and advancements and all that kind of stuff is flowing on a regular basis, and there's really interesting conversations, and of course there's drama and all that stuff, but like, and so it's a very tangible world to us, but to them it's not even a thing that exists. Like, they're not aware of that little bubble. And so it made me think, like, how many other like super intense Twitter bubbles am I not aware of that are like everything to some people?
Yeah, I mean, we've been using the internet. The internet may be young, but I've been using it for most of my life, I guess. And we've always had like these little communities, like whether it be like if you're in your favorite game or guild or whatever in that game, or even going as far back with like bulletin board systems and things like this. But it's never been so big as with Bitcoin. We're flipping the script here a bit because we're talking about how small it is. But in comparison to like having such a niche culture, it's one of the biggest I've been a part of and the longest lasting.
Yeah, well, I think it's, well, not beginning now. It's been a process of leaking out and expanding into various other industries and other bubbles throughout the course of its history. And every time we have one of these bull runs, that gets exacerbated. Then there's a pullback, and so like I said previously, a lot of people that I knew wouldn't even know what Bitcoin was, and now after 2017, in the last 2 years, people know what it is. Now they might have certain opinions about it that are incorrect, but they've heard the terminology and they kind of understand what people, or they've heard what people are starting to say about it. So I of course I see that as a positive, and it's a step by step for a lot of people. Not everybody's going to grok it on day one and just fall down the rabbit hole. People, there's a lot of factors that are involved in people, getting that, wanting to be that intimately understanding of a given topic. And so, the macro environment of the world, I think, is starting to, gently push people in that direction. But, some people will dive in faster than others. So that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, it takes time, and there's like kind of a whole initiation process with getting into this world. Not that it's intentional, but between the culture aspects and the education aspects, and when you start getting into that, where you have finance aspects, money, economics, cryptography,
Yeah.
networking, systems, like it's just so much to even start being able to like argue remotely intelligently about. And then every wave, when we have a new wave of adopters, it's like you have to start all over again.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
the people that were already there are trying to explain everything, and the people that are all arriving thinking they've discovered, all of they want to make all the mistakes we've already made like 5 times,
Yeah.
um,
Well, that's the challenge, right? Like, I'm sure over the holidays, many people will be at social events and talking about, what are you up to? What are you interested in? And that kind of stuff. And with Bitcoin, if someone's like open-minded and genuinely interested, they're like, oh man, like, tell me about Bitcoin. What's Bitcoin? It's kind of like, where should I start this? Like, how deep should I begin this? Like, should I start with what is money? Should I start with like the technical component as a protocol on the internet? Like, so it's certainly not an easy thing to just get someone to understand willy-nilly. It's like, I mean, I think it's like many other things. You're not going to fully get it unless it's self-directed, unless you want to genuinely understand it and you take the time to investigate all these things.
Yeah, it's sort of like sometimes I feel like it's like living two different lives, because when you're talking to Bitcoin people, it's like if you go to a conference, every conversation is like hyper intensive, and and you can't even walk for like 2 minutes before bumping into somebody that wants to have a conversation like that.
Yeah.
And then when you're like with family or friends or non-Bitcoin people, it's like I'm like kind of like hands off about it. Like I'll try not to talk about it. If somebody brings it up, I try to be very casual and not get into it. And if they do start asking questions, I like only give them a little bit of data, because I'm really trying to see how much they actually want to talk about this, and whether they just want to like argue or be ignorant or whatever. And I just like to stay out of it. So it's like two totally different behaviors.
Yeah, I'm in pretty much in exactly the same spot now. I think we all went through the phase where we were zealots, and anyone, like, we tried to grab people by the head and like tell them how important and amazing this stuff is. But I'm much more zen about it now. So if it comes up, I'm pretty nonchalant. But if there's genuine interest, then I'll feed that interest, but I still won't like overfeed it. I'll just I'm more zen about it. Whatever people want to do, they do.
Definitely, and then having the more you get into Bitcoin, the more you end up having probably an overweight exposure to it in investment, and that affects things as well.
Yeah, of course. So on that note, and with what you're doing at Bitrefill, what do you think are the kind of current drivers of people's interest in Bitcoin or lack thereof? And what do you think, needs to happen for there to be more of it? So I'm kind of, obviously with Bitrefill, you're creating a bit of a circular economy. You're trying to get people to, or try to offer services that allow people to live on and with Bitcoin. But what are some of the, the main, in your mind, hiccups that are creating a bit of a separation between people getting this and wanting to be more involved, or at least understand it better?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of directions we could take this in, I guess. People use Bitcoin because they want to be able to overcome some kind of obstacle, I guess, is one thing. And then otherwise, maybe as an investment, or store of value, or whatever type of investment you want to call it. The people that are trying to solve a problem are maybe closer to a lot of the people that are using Bitrefill and buying gift card and refill products, et cetera. More of the live on crypto type. But the people investing, I guess, would be the other kind of major category. As far as like the whole spectrum, it gets really wide. You talk about people that are using Bitcoin as a better alternative to really inflated money of their local country. People say, like we mentioned earlier, that are in kind of oppressed or banking oppressed industries like the adult industry, gambling, etc. People, there's a lot of weird little things, and this is something that gift cards can help with, like with not necessarily breaking laws or even breaking rules, but just filling in gaps in kind of the remittance system that the internet is trying to forge, but whereas the banking system might not be helping too well with. Somebody that's maybe from one country living in another country trying to send value back home, but having exorbitant costs to do so, or lots of delays. So there's every kind of problem that Bitcoin is solving. Just depends on kind of what spectrum you want to what area of the spectrum you want to talk about.
Yeah. And what do you think is, excuse me, the one of the major stumbling blocks to people getting involved for any one of those reasons? And just to give some context or an example, when I was in Laos this summer, and the Lao kip, which is the currency there, is not very desirable. They accept the kip, the Thai baht, and the US dollar in most businesses, and they accept the latter two, but they only give back the kip, right? So you kind of have a Gresham's law sort of thing going on there.
Mm-hmm.
To do a Western Union money transfer, the fee for $100 transfer is 15%. So it's absolute robbery in whether you're talking about remittances or money transfer and stuff like that. But and I know a lot of people there probably aren't aware of Bitcoin, but most people around the world have smartphones today. So what do you think is the gap that's the gulf between those people that you just referenced that that Bitcoin would either help or ameliorate their situation, and why they may not be engaging in it?
Sure. I guess one way to look at it, you could say, is the only way to cure ignorance is with information, and the only way to some people learn in different ways, and some people will learn when they experience pain, and they will try to be resourceful and alleviate that pain and seek out new information. So that could be like paying a very high fee, hitting a roadblock with trying to do something with your money that you can't, having local money that is just inferior to Bitcoin, etc. Or you can cure that ignorance and find information because you're positioning yourself in the world and you're doing your own research and you're always interested in finding better things or better prices or more efficient ways of living your life. we could say that, it's our job to educate, but this is something I'm a little conflicted about. Like I always get a little uncomfortable when people are like saying that we need to onboard, everybody, we need mass adoption, and we need to get everybody in here. On one hand, I kind of sympathize because I don't want anybody to miss out on something that I think is like a better tool.
Hmm.
Like if we're inventing fire here, we don't want to leave people out in the cold.
Yeah.
But anybody who's been in Bitcoin long enough has been in Bitcoin long enough to feel like their paper buying power value decrease drastically when they look at their Bitcoin balance, and you don't really want to be responsible for bringing somebody in here and then them not properly, preparing themselves, educating themselves fully, losing their Bitcoin, getting caught in a scam, all of the pitfalls that come with holding your own digital money.
Yeah. Yeah, I've come across that with myself before too, and I think the balance that I at least have struck is that the zealotry and the trying to get people to get into it or invest in it and stuff, that that I've withdrawn from because of the reasons you mentioned, because I don't want to take the responsibility of kind of hand holding someone or gently forcing someone to do something and then have a negative outcome affect their perception of me and my advice. But I think putting information out there, or even not information, these types of discussions where people can tune in if they want and not if they don't, that just provides a little bit more context and a little bit more knowledge and information about what this is and how it might be relevant in the future and even right now, then that I'm happy with that balance, because obviously we're not forcing anybody to do anything. We're just providing our thoughts on why this might be valuable now and into the future. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah, over time, we've had to learn how to get better at even explaining this to people anyway. I remember in the first few years I was here, I was saying things, and the people I was learning from were saying things that we would all not, we'd be embarrassed to hear us explain those ways today.
Right.
So, as a whole community and as an industry, we're still growing up as well.
Yeah. The thing I often relate it to, or what I think about it in these terms in my mind, I'm a I guess you would say a big advocate, or maybe not advocate, but I see great value in the psychedelic substances, properly used in a responsible manner, yada yada yada. And it's a very similar thing to me because I see tremendous benefit from them, but it's such a such a serious thing, and it's such a it requires so much of you in terms of responsibility and courage and self-reflection and things like this. And I feel the same about Bitcoin, because it's a worldview change to go from my bank holds my wealth and they secure it, and if anything goes wrong I can hit them up and it's insured and it's their fault and liability, and all the safety measures that are put in place, to saying I'm now exclusively the one who's in control of my wealth and as a result my future. And that's a very significant mental shift that I think, well, a lot of people are very hesitant to make. And I relate it to the psychedelic realm as well, because that's a very it's a decision of great responsibility, and I don't want to be the one pushing people into it. I want to provide some information and some context and then let them do with it as they please.
Yeah, I mean, like I assume you're talking about stuff like micro dosing and that kind of thing.
No,
This
no,
is.
I'm talking about like heroic dosing of, let's say, psilocybin, like your a high dose kind of spiritual experience rather than
Yeah,
microdosing. Yeah.
it's something I'm pretty ignorant about, honestly, so I can't really comment on that aspect.
Fair enough. No, I just mean that like the way of approaching them is very similar to me. You've really got to be careful about how, like you said, like even if we agree we want adoption, and you can argue like should we be striving for that, but if that's something that you want, you got to be really careful about how you go about bringing people into the fold. And so again, my balance is not on either of those subjects is not to grab people by the face and tell them they have to do it and how amazing it all is. It's just to provide information and context, and then let them do as they see fit.
Sure, I think the market kind of tells us what it needs at times too. Like when there's a bear market, even though that's probably when we should be, or when is a better time to go out there and tell people that it's a good time and to invest, we are now seeing like cycles where we see like building cycles where people are kind of, trimming all of the fat that they added during the bull run. The kind of fluffy ICOs and things like this die out, and we kind of have a rebuilding phase before the next kind of bull market.
Yeah.
And during a bull market, then all the scams are coming back and everybody's trying to get everybody's Bitcoin from each other. And we have to go back into like another education mode to keep the people from falling off the cliff.
Yeah, you're so right. So where do you think we are in that whole cycle right now?
I would like to think we're basically at the bottom of the barrel. I think somewhere in the next couple of months, I would like to hope to see the bottom in the bear market, and start to see us recovering back to levels we were seeing, higher levels we were seeing in 2019, and then eventually by the end of the year, hopefully recovering 20,000 and seeing what we can find above there.
Yeah. You know, it's easy to look back, as the saying goes, past performance is not an indicator of future results, but it's easy to look back with Bitcoin because, in a way, because of the way it's structured technologically and the way it's played out in the markets, it's tempting to look back and say, like, you can see a pattern of how it goes. But on the other hand, I always think with Bitcoin, it's always going to surprise you. So, I obviously share that view. I think most people think like, we're finding a bottom right now, and maybe we're in kind of like a late 2015 sort of stage, and the next couple of years would maybe somewhat approximate 2016 and 17, but also you never know. I mean, maybe we'll be in this sort of situation for 4 or 5 years. I wouldn't predict it because I do still feel like so much the space is growing in so many ways other than the price, but you never know.
Well, we see a lot of like reports and data and analysis coming out, like with the whole stock to flow trend recently, and everybody taking a lot of confidence in that chart and that method. But yeah, you're right. We have to always remember that we can't actually predict the future, and that there could be things like macro cycles where we have like, maybe we have cycles within cycles, and sometimes we need to just have a bear market for 3 years or 4 years. You never know.
Yeah. So tell me, let's break into the tweets and the article a little bit, because I think this is a really interesting subject matter. But tell me who secures Bitcoin and why.
You do.
Well,
And the reason why is because the only time you can perceive the truth and is when you observe it, and so you need a node to do that.
mhm.
So if you actually want to secure Bitcoin, you like the article kind of handholds you through. You have to first agree with everybody else on what Bitcoin is, and then you have to check. And the only way to check is with your node. So you're the one that secures Bitcoin. I don't want to abstract that to mean that like you define Bitcoin as in you can call a fork Bitcoin or you can call an altcoin Bitcoin. I don't want to go that far, but
Well, we
you
know your
can't really
stance on
see what
that.
Bitcoin is. Yeah, but you can't see what Bitcoin is without running a node. And
Right.
so securing Bitcoin just means enforcing the rules of Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is just, as the article explains, it's just a way of tracking, assigning keys to the you know tokens within the system, bitcoins, and managing a rule set for what's allowed to change the ownership of those coins.
Yeah.
That's it.
And I liked how in that article, I don't know if you would call it a play on words or just, a literal interpretation, but when you describe store of value, because this is a concept we talk about a lot with money and in the space, of course, and, people usually talk about it in economic terms, but you were, I guess literal is the best way to describe, the way you described it in your article, which was that, you're literally just assigning a value, as in like a numerical value, a numerical input to, for lack of a better term, or the way Guy described it, a cell in a spreadsheet, and just tracking how that moves.
Yeah, it might be an oversimplification, when talking to a programmer or a cryptographer, but in general, that's really what's going on. And I do think it is, you know, pretty valuable to be that literal, because it kind of allows you, once you can establish a base of like primitives and basic definitions of what's really happening with the technology, it allows you to very quickly dispel, FUD and kind of absurd abstractions that the detractors will try to make. And if you say, look, Bitcoin is literally designed for protecting the integrity of stored values in a database, well, you can kind of like just make somebody say, like Roger Ver, for example, just that argument alone makes most of what he's doing in arguing absolutely absurd, because it's exactly the same purpose of Bitcoin Cash. Like he can't say it's not for a store of value and that Core ruined the whole Bitcoin experience because they focused on store of value. It's what a blockchain's for.
Right. And why do you think, and this may be a big question, but why do you think that's valuable, important, relevant, something that does that in the way that Bitcoin does that?
Because it allows us to have a shared truth, a shared ledger, without having to trust a central party. It takes any type of role that somebody in escrow or accounting or central banking or central database management, whatever. It takes that role and it splits it up into as many pieces as possible, and it makes those pieces, that the only way that they can kind of coordinate and conspire is if everybody does it. And even then, that's that doesn't even get into the conversation of whether or not you actually want to acknowledge the concept of hard forks as people describe them in this world, whether they even exist in this context. Because what I'm explaining works mostly in protecting and avoiding any change to the rules. So soft working, you can add new rules, but you can't change any.
Mm-hmm. And so this makes it, or how much does this make it important or matter that most people converge on the same consensus rules and uphold the same ledger? How important is it that as you just said, like maybe the forks don't even matter? I'm not sure exactly if you were referring to this by that, but there's been lots of forks and lots of other coins, and this has been something I've been discussing a little bit with people lately and thinking on my own. Obviously most people are upholding the consensus rules of Bitcoin, and that establishes many of its characteristics, and in particular makes relevant something like its scarcity, right? Because technically now the digital scarcity genie is kind of out of the bottle. You could, and I just mean you could replicate Bitcoin's design very easily and change one little thing, but the nodes are upholding that it's Bitcoin scarcity that matters. So, not a great question in there, but tell me your thoughts on that statement.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to pick out one context with all of this, because there's a lot of ways to look at it. I'm trying to think.
Maybe I should try to be a bit more clear with that. But so what a lot is made of Bitcoin scarcity, right? And everyone's excited about the stock to flow and its digital scarcity and its absolute scarcity for the first time and all this kind of stuff. But there's thousands. We could make as many of those protocols as we wanted. What's important?
So on that specific level, like the inflation of database values is kind of what I hear you saying on that specific topic. So like that was always possible, right? Like we could always make as many databases as we wanted, and we could always even share them and give access to, give limited access or authenticated access to any database for as many people we want. The difference here is that just making a copy of Bitcoin does not mean that you've created something that is as valuable as Bitcoin.
Sure.
You need the kind of sunk cost of the proof of work to be able to have everybody be incentivized to value that ledger as money. And so every time you create and spin a new blockchain up, especially one that is trying to compete with Bitcoin anyway as just a money, you're just creating a lower security network than Bitcoin with lower kind of sunk proof of work into it. And so the incentives are, you're just kind of starting from scratch. We could talk about how we're learning over this past decade that there's a tribal aspect to money that you can't even deny or separate out our from the anthropological aspects of how we behave. And maybe that just means that money's become tribal representations, almost like brands or kind of internet sovereign entities,
Hmm.
that kind of are on another separate layer to kind of government meat space jurisdictional entities. Maybe we have money jurisdictions or money cultures or money tribes. I don't know. It seems like that's what's happening a little bit now, but the question is just how long and how much value is going to be lost before we find the efficiencies in this exploration. I
Yeah.
think there's going to be a lot of these networks that just prove to be pretty much copies of databases that a lot of people speculated on, and then many people are left holding bags that disappeared.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I think the point on tribalism is, whether we want to call it that or something less offensive to whoever's sensibilities or whatever. But I think that's probably is what we are seeing right now. And I guess the only, the thing I was exploring in my mind, and perhaps doing so because I don't feel like it's that commonly talked about, is like Bitcoin is a tremendous innovation in bringing together, a variety of innovations and making it all work together. But people are so excited about the opportunity for digital scarcity and absolute scarcity that now exists, but just kind of remembering that even though there's a huge moat around Bitcoin because of its head start and its network effect and the sunk cost of all the proof of work and all that kind of stuff, it still is very much so socially upheld, is it not?
I guess there's a lot to split here, a lot of hairs to split here. And it becomes difficult. Like a lot of the reason why a lot of people were interested in other tribes of cryptocurrencies was just because they desired a higher risk profile. They
Right.
saw a potential for more upside, and they even acknowledged that it came with higher risk, and they didn't care. They just wanted to see if they could take a roll of the dice. So and maybe there's a bit of a phenomenon to where those people then either fail at that, or that becomes a much longer term gamble than they realized it was going to be, and they start becoming tribal and start becoming shills, and then they start believing their own stories, and it just becomes a tribal mess on social media.
Hmm.
But in the end, I think that there's an unspoken truth for a lot of these people and a lot of these coins that it's just simply they're trying to get rich fast.
Right. Oh, for sure, for sure. But this is something I talked about with Knut Svanholm, the author of Sovereignty Through Mathematics, and the point that he was making, and that I've been thinking about, before and since, was just that, and I'll come to a question here, but he was saying, if digital Bitcoin is the first representation of digital scarcity, but obviously there's as we've been talking about other projects and tribes that have tried to design that, and they are, I guess, voting with their dollars that it's better in some way or whatever. But one of the main attributes of money that we all value is its scarcity, is its difficulty to produce in whatever quantity, is its difficulty to manipulate or devalue or that sort of thing. And so that's our big gripe with fiat money today, and that's why things like gold have been popular in the past and now Bitcoin. And so the attribute of scarcity is so very important if we're talking about money. And I guess the question that Knut and I were talking about was, if for whatever reason, and I don't see this happening, I'm extremely bullish on Bitcoin, but for whatever reason, if we decided that another tribe was better, or we wanted to move over, or Bitcoin failed or something like that, if it became apparent that that scarcity could be transferred over from one protocol or network to another, and then maybe to another and to another, does that diminish the attribute of scarcity that these digital protocols ultimately provide, and does that diminish its value as a potential money as we move forward? Do you know what I'm
Uh,
trying to say there?
I know what you're saying, and the
Yeah.
answer is no, because that's actually a trick question. It just doesn't work like that. This is why this gets into why I actually don't believe in hard forks. I don't believe that Bitcoin. Yeah, I mean, there's a small chance. I don't totally exclude it, but I don't believe that Bitcoin can actually do a hard fork where there is a full transfer of value from the old fork to the new fork. And the reason why that this doesn't break you can't break the digital scarcity concept with this, because you're literally trying to ask me, John, how can we move this scarcity of value? How can we make it portable across networks? So you're not asking me, John, what about all of the inflation of scarcity I'm explaining to you? You're asking me how I can port the value, and that's not the same question, I think. And that's why I don't think hard forks exist, and that's why I don't think that it's as simple as just because somebody can print more numbers in a database and assign some security to that network, that doesn't mean that it's a good alternative for Bitcoin. I'll elaborate further, and I'll say that I think that this is like this is not just about digital scarcity, and money people use as a tool, and they use stores of value in different ways. And so I think of it more as people are looking to tune their time preference and their volatility profile. And so if there's somebody that, say, has and you'll see this in all the different use cases of Bitcoin and how it expresses itself. If somebody has a local currency that is highly inflated by their government, and now they have access to Bitcoin, they may choose to use Bitcoin instead of that highly inflated money, even though they can't afford to save money. They may just say, okay, even within one day, my volatility is so high with this inflated money that I'm still willing to just hold Bitcoin instead. And even if that means I'm going to spend all my Bitcoin every day or every week or every month and not actually give myself much exposure to the long-term scarcity, they'll still use Bitcoin. Or the same, the reverse. If somebody like really truly understands the value proposition of Bitcoin and would love to be able to store as much value as possible in it, they still may not choose it because they can't afford to store value. They may just say, I'm living paycheck to paycheck, and all of my expenses are in fiat, and I'm kind of in the fiat trap, and this is how it's going to be. So the money is the tool, the store of value, but the volatility profile that somebody suits somebody is going to be adjusted to their time preference, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And what do you think, on the subject of forks, what do you think, and I guess there's many answers to this, but what are the fundamental understandings that these people, let's take Roger or let's take BSV crowd, or really, anyone, get wrong about Bitcoin and how it operates, that inspires them to actually do that? I guess they just disagree with what you just said, right? They think it can be transferred over, and this is their attempt to do so.
No, I don't think that's what. At least with Roger. I mean, I assume you're talking about maybe the premier cases like
Yeah, sure,
Roger
sure.
and Vitalik. Like Roger and Vitalik are probably the two most famous cases of somebody kind of picking up and leaving Bitcoin so they could do what Bitcoin wouldn't allow them to do. I don't know that they got something wrong in the scarcity case. What they got wrong was they wanted to do things that ultimately centralized Bitcoin more than Bitcoiners were willing to kind of support.
Right.
They still managed to get support, much less so in the case of, say, Bitcoin Cash than Ethereum. Ethereum has a relatively healthy ecosystem as far as I can tell. Still much smaller in commerce, by a long shot to Bitcoin, but what they wanted to do is they wanted to make systems that didn't seem, to any of the engineers and architects of this technology, that didn't seem like they were sustainable and safe. And when you're talking about the context of that, you're trying to provide a maximally redundant network to ensure the security of that network, the integrity of that database. Well, that integrity of that database is the most important thing. And if you start making changes to the design of the system that can compromise that, then you're strictly just choosing, more features for less security.
Right. So, and that's a super important point that you touched on, right? The integrity of the database is the most important thing, right?
I think so. I mean, but
Well, that's what
that
this is
you can
all about.
abstract that, that's pretty simple and oversimplified.
Well, sure.
That integrity, comes from the kind of pillars of Bitcoin's design.
Sure. Yeah, no, totally agree. But I guess it was oversimplified. But I guess what I'm just saying is that, you know, and this is actually the conversation on the social aspect of scarcity kind of touches on this, but again, just one of those pillars. But it's that, the whole reason why people, and I think you touched on this in your article, the whole reason why people have confidence in this and the whole concept of immutability has to do with, the integrity of the database, that people can trust that it is what it is and it'll continue to represent that. And I guess, forks like Bcash and like Ethereum, well, Ethereum not quite the same, but that it changes that integrity, and there's got to be a loss of confidence that accompanies that. Is that
For
right?
sure, yeah, for sure, and and it is important to distinguish between Bcash and a fork and Ethereum, a new network, because the fork is just, in my opinion, Bitcoin Cash is what like a highly successful double spend attack looks like. Like he basically convinced a lot of people to accept the same Bitcoin transaction, the same Bitcoin values twice. It's just a huge double spend counterfeit attack, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't believe in 2019, eh, the way that Roger's promoting Bitcoin Cash is still like, the same as it's been for a long time, and he's still beating that drum. But this there's a lot of strange people and strange behavior out there, I guess.
Sure. I'm of the kind of theory or hypothesis or opinion that manipulating markets is actually pretty expensive. And I classify what he's doing as manipulating a market. You could be kinder and say he's bootstrapping a market, but funding the growth of a market at, as a few small entities, maybe Roger and Craig and whoever the hell else put some time and money and effort into this, that it burns you, like
Yeah.
they're going to keep burning value if they don't get traction. It's just like a startup, it's a product. And of course he's going to keep pimping out his product because he's probably overexposed to the success of that product.
Right. Right. So giving up on it would mean well, in his mind, I guess, would mean a greater loss than having whatever effect that he could have in bringing up the value or expanding it in some way or whatever. But
He probably sees it that way, but it's just as simple as an opportunity cost. Like he in the end
yeah.
has to decide whether he thinks his promotion of this fork product is going to bring him more buying power when by the time he's done than just moving that value into a different investment
Yeah,
like Bitcoin.
for sure. Um, John, I want to ask you about, and this is something again that I've been thinking about a bunch lately, but what is the relationship of the cost of, the cost of the power energy devoted to the network, to Bitcoin mining, and its value, its market price? I know it's kind of out of left field, but I just
I mean,
want your thoughts on it.
it's there are dimensions to it at this point, because yes, the cost that you can create Bitcoin for by mining is, going to give you more advantage in profitability or buying power or whatever your goals are in mining. But it doesn't, paying more to make Bitcoin doesn't necessarily make Bitcoin worth more. There are supply and demand effects here, and ultimately, what we're actually asking miners to supply are blocks. Basically ledger updates. They're getting the mining rewards as incentive
Right.
to act out that function. But the amount of Bitcoin that gets created doesn't change but every 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of like there's a cycle to what you're talking about. There's dimensions to what you're talking about. So I think that mining in Bitcoins will actually have an effect on the energy cost of homogenizing energy costs, eventually throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. It's probably good because markets becoming more efficient seems good to me. But yeah, I don't know what if energy suddenly became more expensive all across the world, does that make Bitcoin worth more? Yeah, probably, actually. Like Bitcoin ultimately functions as a kind of load balancer to fiat inflation. So if costs are going up, it's probably because fiat. We're talking about fiat costs. So yeah, I think it could be an indicator, but I don't know if it's like a functioning effect.
Yeah. And I think it's cool to look at it in those terms, and you mentioned this in your article as well, but, just that miners supply blocks, right? And so there's a supply and demand, operates here where the market is saying, we're demanding blocks to such a degree that the miners will make economic calculation and determine that a certain cost to provide those blocks is economically rational because of how the market is valuing them. So, it's and I find that amazing too, because obviously the hash rate is going up and the amount of energy devoted to the network is typically on an upward trajectory, which is basically just indicating that the market is saying, we value blocks, or we're willing to pay more and more and more and more for blocks.
I think that everything about Bitcoin is kind of like throwing a machine learning algorithm into the economy to find inefficiencies, and it expresses itself, sometimes directly and sometimes indirectly. So, I think we're going to see the same thing in regards to mining.
That's a very cool. I like that. Can you say that again? We're throwing a machine learning algorithm into the economy to find inefficiencies, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because like you can't just like for example, the mining hashing has gone like up on a trend even stronger than the price of Bitcoin, even if you factor in, halvings and stuff. It's just been like on a ripping trend
Mm-hmm.
since ASICs basically, and the hash rate just I don't think anybody has written some kind of like, research paper or analysis that shows an obvious, explanation and rationale as to how this has been possible.
Mm-hmm.
I have theories about it, but I think what it really means is there's some kind of inefficiency in the system, not the Bitcoin system, the economy, and Bitcoin found it, and miners found it. And it's probably something to do with exploiting, the gap between these economies. Basically, something like where, miners found out that the energy market was supremely inefficient in pricing, and they were able to find more and more ways to exploit that and create Bitcoin cheaply. But it could be other things too.
Yeah. I I find like digging into that, especially if I have a little like, yeah, just letting my mind wander around those concepts is, always very interesting because it's so intricate and detailed, and there's so many different things to consider. But one of the things just regarding money, if we can, it doesn't have to necessarily refer to Bitcoin, but do you think, whether it's Bitcoin or whether it's gold, there's the cost to produce it, and then there's the face value or the market price. And, in most times and cases, the cost to produce it will be lower than the market price. Otherwise, it's not economically rational to produce it. Obviously, there's, aberrations for certain short periods of time where that's not the case. But, and I don't know if you'll have
I'm following you. That concept is exactly why I think there's an inefficiency that Bitcoin found.
sure, sure, sure.
Like I don't think it's just that there was a lot of lack of homogenization and energy price in the world. I think it could also be factors like tax incentives and aspects of forming your mining of basically if you buy your Bitcoin through a business interest of mining, then there are probably certain tax exemptions or basically cost of goods tricks you can do with accounting that actually make it cheaper for you to get that Bitcoin than it might seem.
Yeah. And that points back to your statement about kind of finding those inefficiencies, right? And I guess monetizing them in some way.
Yeah, I mean, on the internet, people like are hunting for easy money.
Right.
Like on every corner of the spectrum. From it might be trying to find where they can make 10 cents, a million times, or it could be where they can see where somebody's really willing to lose a lot of money and a lot of efficiency somehow.
Yeah. And so this has made me wonder, and you could even, put it in the context of fiat money. Let's just say, for argument's sake, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but a dollar bill costs 5 cents to make, and it's sold onto the market for $1 or something like that. And gold, let's say an ounce costs $1,000 and it sells for 1,200, and Bitcoin, whatever it is. Do you think with Bitcoin we will find this? Do you think there's a particular optimized ratio for money between the cost to produce it and its market price? Obviously we're seeing with Bitcoin, a fiat money obviously takes that to the extreme in the bad way, right? You shouldn't be able to create something at such a lower cost than you're able to sell it for. And obviously the government monopoly and legal tender and all that kind of stuff allows that to be the case. But in a pure free market for money, what do you think the ratio between cost to produce and market value of money would be? I'm just curious.
So I don't know if this will be a trolley answer, but okay. First, I'm not an economist, and you're probably asking the wrong person.
Sure.
Actually, the more I talk to you and I listen to some of your other stuff, you should probably see if you can get Eric Voskuil on the show.
I had a 3-hour podcast with him, and
okay.
Actually,
So
it might have been longer. I think it was like 3 or 4 hours, and I had a bunch of stuff I wanted to talk to him about, like I had written on a notepad, and we stopped to take a drink of water, for 5 minutes, but I didn't touch on one of the things I wanted to ask him because we just started rolling, and he has a lot to say about this stuff. So I'm definitely going to talk to him again, because a lot of the questions that I'm currently mulling over stems from my conversation with him.
Yeah, I mean, like I told Peter McCormick that I considered him to be the most rational Bitcoiner, but that's kind of an understatement, to be honest. Like I have personal, like, reminders in my work that are saying make more time to read more of Eric's stuff, because anytime I read something he says, I'm like, you know what, this guy is fucking right about everything. Like, but what was we were talking about? Oh, so my trolley answer is, well, to me, the obvious optimal ratio is the cost being zero to produce money. And then my second trolley answer is that I think that maybe you're in the wrong paradigm. It doesn't have like the Bitcoin won't keep printing money. And so now you're going to have to change your question to be, the cost of maintaining the network to be able to provide new blocks.
Right.
And then you get into arguing whether or not you think miners secure the network and whether there's a cost in that, and so it's almost the wrong question potentially. You can ask it while Bitcoin is still issuing, but what happens when it stops? What does your question do?
Well, I guess because it will still be an economic calculation by the miners, right? The cost that they're willing to devote to produce blocks, and then the price that the market is willing to pay. Whether the revenue for the miners is generated by rewards or fees, is that relevant?
Yes, extremely, because we're talking about new stock. This is for many years to come. There will continue to be new. They will actually be creating money,
Right.
And so it's a dynamic that changes over time and changes every 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't actually know how useful the question is, because now that we have a networked world, and now that we have technology that can even network money, like the world is going to create every color in the spectrum, and you're going to choose whichever one you want.
Right. What do you think is one of the more misunderstood, apart from what we've gone over, misunderstood aspects of how all this works? Like you have a lot of conversations with people, both privately and on podcasts and stuff. What do you find is something that, like, a lot of people often, in your opinion, get wrong or see maybe too narrowly?
I don't know. Honestly, I haven't been talking to a lot of non-Bitcoin people lately. Almost for the whole past year, I haven't really. So I might be a little bit out of touch as far as what people get wrong. But maybe I'll comment on something that's kind of gotten wrong in Twitter lately, or social media and news, which is, things like Mark Cuban saying things like, Bitcoin is a failed project, or he's waiting for the next Bitcoin because that's going to be the better one. This conception that, like, Bitcoin is old and out of date, or old, version 1.0 while everybody's on 2 and 3.0. That's definitely a misconception, and definitely really makes education and debate a pain in the ass, because you got one guy trying to argue features, another guy trying to argue the fundamentals of why blockchains are even useful, and the new person's like, okay, but features sound really cool, and they think, well, why can't I have both? And the truth is, like, you can't even really give them a solid answer, because they can have both, but they just have to understand that they're choosing like two totally different like risk profiles.
Right. There's definitely a hierarchy of importance for different features, and also features are way easier to understand. Like you said, they're more like attractive or appealing. Like someone says 1,000 transactions a second, and to someone who doesn't understand the deeper layers of the network and why this is important and et cetera, then they might just think, well, clearly it's better, it can do more transactions, right?
Sure, but I could play devil's advocate and say we can be just as guilty as Bitcoiners at being closed-minded about these things,
Go
because
for it.
there have been cases where I have no problem saying that we were wrong, and that there were maximalist aligning concepts that are just kind of, you've got to basically sound like a religious nut to uphold at this point. Things like uh, tokens being completely useless. We have Tether now with billions of dollars in it, and we have articles about how people use Tether to overcome banking challenges, or like, Americans don't realize that there are other parts of the world that can't use the American USD banking system the way we can. And so they don't understand that there's a concept of how Tether can actually unlock things for people. Bitcoiners, maximalists, will be hesitant to respect what I talked about earlier, with there being different volatility profiles and different time preferences. And if you think of money as a tool, you don't really need to care what color that tool is, or how big the handle is, or whether it has a built-in screwdriver. Like,
Hmm.
it's not your problem in the end. And so I think that we have to adapt, because we do learn things, and it would be silly to like deny or delay some kind of cool way that people leverage this tech, just because we have a religious alignment and kind of hesitance to expand our definition of Bitcoin or blockchain. Even for me, like, I was definitely somebody making fun of people, really, and really holding them accountable for like blockchain concepts. And my own kind of understanding of using a blockchain outside of Bitcoin, it has expanded. I think that if you break it down into the simple, concept of where you're trying to be able to have multiple people participate in a database and have a shared history, there are other situations than money where that could be interesting. The example I used to give was more, the I used to use it as a way of saying this is the exception that proves the rule, but I think it's actually the example that you can now try to find other echoes and similar examples, which is, I do think that you could make a blockchain for tokens for securities that was run by an overseer. Basically, like, if the SEC deployed a Wall Street blockchain, they could achieve a certain amount of trustlessness between the participants and them and their ability to operate with each other, and still have a centrally controlled, protocol and database that was blockchain based that would be better for it.
Right. So, things that uses that could improve on existing systems, but
Right.
which don't necessarily have to be in competition or better or worse than Bitcoin, just able to improve other systems as they exist today.
Right, and there are other industries like that. The
Yeah.
problem is that, like, many times people go too far and they don't respect the limitations of this idea, and so those start trying to do things like blockchain physical items. So, like, looking at similar industries to, say, that the SEC example, you could say like supply chain problems, and this is a very common one. But the problem was that you can't blockchain meat space. So it's just like you're really the advantage of tokenizing or blockchaining your industry or your problem. Uh, you really have to have the right fit. You really need to have an overseer in place and other participants that don't that can't trust each other, but still have to interact digitally.
Yeah. What do you make of this new uh, DGLD, I think it's called, or GLDG, or the gold backed crypto project from I don't know who it's. I think blockchain is some.
It's a coin shares sponsored thing with
Right.
blockchain.com, I think is the two parties involved. Um, I don't know. Like I want to, I was inclined at first, and you can see me act it out on Twitter in the past few days, um, to be like, this is such garbage, this is such bullshit, blah blah blah, because of what we just talked about, not being able to blockchain real things. But you know, uh, Tether works, and Tether is just one central party, and people trust it, and people seem to be able to redeem it. And so, as a business, if you can establish a reputation for people valuing your IOUs, then go for it. Uh, but for me, I don't really see a great product market fit. I just think that the type of people that want to invest in gold will at least increasingly become, if they're not already, more interested in convenience, or that will kind of be polar, or more interested in holding physical gold. And so the tokenized version kind of fills this, like, it fills a gap in the spectrum, but I don't know if people want to tune their time preference that finely. They just kind of,
Right.
they might just need Bitcoin and dollars, and then gold in between kind of comes, just doesn't really serve a purpose.
Yeah. I've often thought that people who advocate for that solution in particular understand neither gold nor Bitcoin. But if in the context of these maybe small incremental improvements in some aspect of how markets work. So, for example, if you've ever bought non-allocated certificate silver or gold, right? You go to your bank, you get a piece of paper. It says you own 500 ounces, blah blah blah, and we pay to the order of whomever when you want to redeem it. Maybe something that allows for more liquidity of a product like that, where you still have counterparties and you still have all the rest of it. Maybe the market does demand that like incremental improvement and greater liquidity, and as a result, there's demand, there's a market for that kind of a product. I don't think it competes in any way with something like Bitcoin provides, or in physically owned, allocated, or personally owned gold, but maybe there's a market for what it does provide.
Right. The problem for blockchaining physical things or tokenizing them physical things is that delivery is still physical.
Right.
So you can't change that with a blockchain. And so you ultimately you're just creating a different type of token. And so what is the advantage of a kind of centrally managed digital token like, the GLD ETF or something like this? What is the advantage to having a crypto one?
I
If
guess for
you
trading, right?
It would be more for being for portability, I think, which is similar, a
Right.
similar
Right.
quality, but the portability in the sense that, like, okay, most developed countries in the world have some kind of easy way to buy paper gold, right? Like they have
Mm-hmm.
stock markets, et cetera. In many of them even have gold shops within walking distance in many places, to buy physical gold. So who doesn't have access to gold but still wants it? Maybe third world countries, or highly places like Venezuela and Argentina with high inflation. Maybe they'll have interest in it, but it's still ultimately just trusting a centralized product. So it's like, I don't know. I'm not sure. Like I said, it fills a gap in the spectrum, but I don't know how many people really want to live in that gap.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I totally agree. It's not appealing to me. I was just looking at it from the context of, something that I'd actually done in the past, which was buy a certificate for precious metals. And, in order to sell that, I would have to go to the bank and sell the entire thing and, go through that rigmarole. If I could sell 1% of it on an open liquid market for the token, maybe all the risks are still there, that I don't own it, I don't
Yeah.
transport it, I don't have possession of it. Maybe there's a market for the added efficiency that provides, if any. But like I said, I'm not really looking for personally, I'm not looking for that kind of a service.
I've grown more tolerant of these things, but I really hate seeing them because when they're not strict improvements over what people are doing before, it's like I know what's going to happen.
Right.
There's going to be too much value and too much trust put in it until it breaks and people get burned, and then like a negative reputation starts being developed for that tech or that company or that format. So it's like I don't want to. I hate having to go through every cycle of blockchain technology, always having to like watch people get burned, watch people be scammy and tell lies and pump things and misinform people on the risks and things at play. Like it's a real chore, and it's kind of like depressing, and it's a real grind on what we're trying to do, to have to see everybody try everything.
Yeah, I hear you, man. But I think it's inevitable, right? The next bull run is going to have the same thing, and probably the one after that, and maybe at some point we'll all converge and transcend that. But it might just be the human condition when great opportunity arises and there's a huge asymmetry of knowledge around it. There's going to be the cracks where all that shit slips in.
Yeah, I mean, if my theory about Bitcoin being seeking out efficiencies is right, then the question just becomes how efficient can it be at doing that, and what can we do to help it accelerate?
Yeah, fair enough. I like that. That's a hopeful spin on it. All right, John. Last one before we break into the final rapid fire portion. But when you were saying about the tribal component of even Bitcoiners being a bit closed off, I mean, I do agree. I think Bitcoiners are the ones that I've encountered are very thoughtful and educated and desire to know as much as possible. But in many of us there exists the desire for comfort and confidence and certainty, right? And so whether we're talking about Bitcoin or any other capacity or facet of life, when you find a high degree of what you believe to be or what you perceive to be certainty, maybe your ego or a part of you kind of overextends that, and that can cause things like tribalism or overconfidence or rejection of other ideas and stuff like that. And I think any community is going to be subject and susceptible to that in some capacity. And perhaps the hardcore Bitcoin maximalist community is in some way guilty of that. But the
Sure. I
reason,
mean, oh,
go
go ahead.
ahead. No,
I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say, like, to really strip this down, like in the end, life the purpose of life is being good at living, and so persistence is the goal here, and so self-preservation is a completely, justifiable and normal human behavior in any situation.
That's an excellent response. That's really good. I like that and agree. But what I was going to say is that when you were saying all that, it brought to mind a current iteration of a couple of the concepts we've been talking about, and that is the controversy, if you want to call it that, around Hex and Richard Hart, and the dialogues that have been going on around that. The project itself, and just wanted to see if you had a take on all of that, both how Bitcoiners have been responding to it and engaging in it, as well as from the project's and Richard's perspective.
Well, they say idle hands are the devil's plaything, and I think that's what's going on here. I think that one, you know, Richard was somehow allowed to get some kind of following and reputation that he surely does not deserve. And even if I am, falling for his trick by believing that a great portion of that is true when it's actually faked, it still is something that he has managed to then now troll people in the Bitcoin community to believing as well, and trying to kind of put out, as get their pitchforks out and put out this fire. Um, I don't know. Like, I think that a lot of people on Twitter had like not enough good stuff to talk about, not being productive enough. In this bear market, there's not a lot of action, not a lot of news, not a lot of stuff to not a lot of meat to stick your fork in, and so people become, actually, this goes back to tribalism. I don't think of tribalism as a negative thing. I think it's a scientific kind of term to me, and in that tribalism, if you don't have a common enemy, you will create one within your tribe. And so this is Bitcoiners seeking out a common enemy, and just kind of not really being very selective and not having much to select from. So they overreacted, in my opinion, and cared way too much. I obviously agree with, the concept of calling out scammers and squashing ignorance and these kinds of things related to this topic. But you know, I never heard of the hex thing in any detail at all until my friends and people I follow started talking about it constantly. So they definitely advertised this thing to me.
Mm.
I didn't know any details about maybe I think I have some capability to kind of like redeem Bitcoin and get free hex or something. Like anything I know about it is because of Bitcoiners.
Mhm.
So that's kind of obviously, I think, a symptom of a bad side effect of this event. But we're also all, kind of cutting our chops, getting our teeth ready. And a lot of people here, I may have been here more years than some, but some people have been here a short time and they're kind of for the first time getting to experience, you know, doing a live stream, debating with a shitcoiner, practicing their ability to translate and relay what Bitcoin is and their understanding of it. I believe that translation explanation is demonstrating your understanding of something. And so when you make that attempt, you are learning and you are kind of evolving the culture of how we talk about things. So it's not all bad. It's just not something I really have any interest in or want to be any part of at the moment.
Yeah. That's the last point you made. That's kind of why I bring it up, because the first aspect and maybe the first question on that is, do you think such people should even be engaged by the community or just ignored? Because as you said, there's a lot of advertising inherent in engaging. But the other aspect is, um, you know, as you said, practicing, kind of defending and explaining and getting ready and that kind of stuff. Some of the live streams, excuse me, that Richard's done with Bitcoiners, and Richard, whatever he is, manipulative, fraudulent, accurate, inaccurate, whatever the actual truth of the matter is, oftentimes, in those debates, or not, maybe not oftentimes, but there were certainly many examples of where maybe the Bitcoin side of the argument, as represented by whichever Bitcoiner was there, maybe didn't come off that great. And I'm just wondering, like, should those people be ignored because ultimately, we're helping them by giving them attention, or should they be engaged because they show us where we need to shore up our argument and our ability to argue for this side of what we're representing? And furthermore, what we're seeking here is truth. I at least I am. I want to know the truth of all matters, and Bitcoin is no different. And if some malevolent actor, even though they're malevolent, is pointing out a misunderstanding that I might have, then I'm still interested in that. Maybe I don't want to signal boost it, but I'm personally interested in that. So what's your take on that?
I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is I think it's an individual decision. Like I individually decided that this wasn't for me. I did give you, an argument for both sides as to why it would be a waste of time or worthwhile. And you'll certainly find people that have been in just Bitcoin just as long as me, maybe longer, whatever, that would take the other side than me and feel like they need to get involved. Like I know like Hodlana and Peter McCormick felt like it was very necessary, and they're cool guys. I have no disrespect for them, so go for it. I just kind of like can't prevent personally like the feeling of like I'm an old man yelling get on and get a job, like that's how I feel when I witness that stuff. But this is my place and my journey, and so these people are on totally different paths. And I, if I want to play devil's advocate, I actually love the idea of Bitcoiners making more content, being more brave, demonstrating their capability to explain and argue Bitcoin. I think these are extremely valuable skills for Bitcoin, and as long as they are actually, sincere about what they're trying to do, it can't really be bad.
Right. I tend to agree with that. All right, John, I'm going to hit you with the rapid fire questions now. So I don't know if you've
I
seen this
No,
format
give me a little
before.
brief, please.
Okay, okay. So basically, the first part is just our questions that you can answer however long or short as you like. And then the last part, which I'll tell you when we get there, is just a word association. So I say a word, you tell me the first thing that pops into your
Oh,
head.
jeez.
Now on the on on the first part, if you want to pass on any of them, just say pass. There's no obligation to answer any of them.
Okay, let's go.
All right. So the first one is, what is money?
Bitcoin.
If you had to explain Bitcoin to a 10-year-old, what would you say?
It's like money, but online.
How will you know if Bitcoin has failed?
I will be working outside of the industry.
What does Bitcoin succeeding look like to you?
Continued growth over the long term.
You have one resource, a book, an article, a podcast episode, website, to refer someone who is just coming to Bitcoin. Which is it?
Twitter.
What other investments are you interested in?
None.
What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone just entering the space?
Hold your Bitcoin as tight as possible. Everybody's trying to take it. Don't let them.
What movie or song is most related to Bitcoin in your opinion?
Uh, Take your pick from the catalog of Propaganda.
Is that what is that?
It's a Canadian punk band that sings about political topics.
Cool. Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
Anything and everything can and will be stopped at some point in time. The question is when. Um, how do I think it could happen? It would most likely be by through coordinated efforts of multiple jurisdictions of governments.
What is something about Bitcoin you don't understand very well or would like to spend more time learning about?
Not that I don't spend enough time already, but still the Lightning Network.
When, if ever, do you think the first central bank will start adding Bitcoin to their reserves? And will central banks exist in 20 years?
I think governments already put Bitcoin in their reserves. I think there is probably also allocations that are not publicly disclosed. So I think the time is now, and it will only become more notable and more public, and maybe even politically strategic and PR, et cetera. What was the other half of that?
Will they exist in 20 years?
Central banks.
Yeah.
I don't know, and I don't care.
What have you learned about yourself, or how have you changed, if at all, as a result of learning about and interacting with Bitcoin?
That there's actually industry and people where there's both a community and on the business side and on the personal side of people that I can actually consider peers and have interests with.
Love it. What is your most controversial or contrarian view or opinion? If none on Bitcoin, any subject is okay.
That Bitcoin is not fungible and never should be.
Oh, can you put a little bit more meat on that?
um, I think that the purpose of Bitcoin being a database, like if you want to agree with this premise, and maintain the integrity of that, I think that a database that is in clear text and fully auditable by a wider spectrum of expertise people makes it a more valuable database. And if you want to build and abstract or obfuscate any aspect of that database and network, then you're welcome to do it on other layers.
And does that affect how it's used as money?
Of course, do I think that it affects it negatively? No. I think it's a good thing. My point in this is that I actually think Bitcoin is better transparent, and I think that it becomes a better building block if it remains that way.
Oh man, I want to break into that, but I'll keep moving. Um, Ballpark estimate of Bitcoin's price in 5 years.
5 years, we'll go 150K.
In the future, this is a question from a past guest. If in the future, when Bitcoin hits, let's say $1 million, what are you going to spend your Satoshis on that will benefit you or society?
The same thing I do today. Maybe I'll be able to live my life at a greater scale with a greater value underneath me. But my main interest today is just living my life and having as few stresses as possible, while doing my best to help Bitcoin channeled through my career experience.
What is one question you'd like to see added to this list?
Oh, hmm. I don't have any. Sorry.
Okay, well, I'll add in one final question on that list then, and it's back to the fungibility issue. And could I just get you to elaborate a little bit more on why Bitcoin functions better, being more open and as you
Sure.
described it.
So I have some older blog posts about this topic, so it's not probably not my best thinking or current thinking on it,
Hmm.
but it's something I tweeted about in the past and pretty recently as well. So you can dig up some, search my handle in Fungible, you'll probably find plenty of comments. But the reason is that I am not anti-privacy by any means. I'm totally for privacy. I'm totally for doing whatever the hell you want with your money and nobody being able to stop you unless you're hurting somebody else, with all things in life. But from a design standpoint, from a technical standpoint, from a human standpoint, I think that, like I said earlier, this is supposed to be something that we can all rely on and all agree on. And if you start turning cryptography into magic, and it will be magic to some people, it already is. I mean, most Bitcoiners don't compile their own node code. They don't understand the cryptography. They're already outsourcing their trust through the reputation system.
Yeah.
So if you want to pile that on and introduce basically the argument for any detractor to say, well, if there is an inflation bug, you cannot detect it, or you may not detect it, even if you silo which people would be hurt by such inflation to only the people that used confidential or private transactions, it's still a major issue. And now that I've been participating in the growth of the Lightning Network on a product level and really doing my best to understand it despite not being a cryptographer or a programmer, it just seems obvious to me. Like,
Right.
if there's things you want to do, Bitcoin is the one that gave you the idea in the first place, and you know that there are ways that you can do pretty much anything with side chains, layers, and kind of basically slave or layered technology to Bitcoin. So just do it. We don't need to keep entertaining reasons to fork Bitcoin if they aren't actually critical.
Hmm. So hands off the base layer and implement this stuff on second, third layers, etc.
Yep, I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist. I'm a Bitcoin extremist.
What does that mean?
It's just I just feel like you just you never fork the chain. It is
Right.
what it is.
Right. And do you think this issue will become, a big issue in the upcoming year, 2, 3? It feels like it might.
So yes and no. It could become an issue because there are respected people in the industry and in the realm of cryptography and blockchains that disagree with me and would like to see fungible Bitcoin totally on the base layer, even if it requires things like extension blocks and other kind of rigged ways to get it to work. But I think that this, one aspect I didn't touch on is it also makes Bitcoin more of a target. It makes the Bitcoin argument a lot more subtle. You have to start, acknowledging that now, society has no ability to kind of track money or see what's going on. It's all going to be in the dark, and the dark, what we had, that's what centralization did. We put everything in the dark, and I'm worried that this turns dark once you make it all fungible on the base layer. I'm worried it becomes something that worth attacking by governments and things like this.
Right.
If we can argue it's a public good, a public service, maybe even a human right to be able to have the freedom of speech to use a public network as a ledger, I believe that we could get there someday. That's where people look at it. Then I just think it's just obvious to me that it needs to be transparent and usable in that way.
As open as possible if it's going to be
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Cool. All right. Last part. Word association. I'll say the word. You tell me what pops into your head.
Okay.
Democracy.
Bullshit.
The Lightning Network.
Awesome.
Government.
Bullshit.
Human rights.
I don't know. Important.
Violence.
Unnecessary.
Ego.
Important.
Wealth.
Subjective.
Privacy.
Important. Maybe also a human right.
Hate speech.
Dramatic.
Gold.
Useless.
Guns.
Complicated.
Revolution.
Join it. I don't know. Participate.
Socialism.
Bullshit.
Family.
Important.
Inequality.
Necessary.
Hell, as in heaven and hell.
I believe death.
Liberty.
Liberty. It's freedom. It's the same thing. It's necessary, human right.
Energy.
Useful.
And Bitcoin.
Money.
John, that was awesome, man. Really, really enjoyed the conversation, and I really appreciate your time. Did you want to shout out any destinations or websites or anything like that?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I did my best with the word associations. It's a little tricky. You can find me on Twitter. My handle is Bitcoin Error Log. Same handle for like Telegram and my Medium blog and such. But I work at Bitrefill, and you can find them at Bitrefill on Twitter and bitrefill.com. And please, come check out our goods if you want to live on crypto.
Cool, man. Well, look, thanks again. Really appreciate the time. Keep up the great work, and maybe we'll have another conversation in Meat Space someday.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
All right, brother. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.